I find that when I ask these characters, what is the absolute worst thing that can happen to you in life, they come back with answers that are so often funny.
Hmm.
And so I just let them take over on the page.
Welcome to our latest episode of Book Reporter Talks to, where our guest today is Kathryn Stockett, who you remember as the author of The Help. You know, that book that came out in 2009 and sold, let's see, 15 million copies worldwide and was later adapted into a critically acclaimed film in 2011. Well, that was then, and this is now. And we are going to be talking about her brilliant new novel, The Calamity Club, which is her first novel in 17 years. Yes, I did the math, so you don't have to. Conversation is taking place a week before the book comes out, so I'm going to share some early praise that we've got for the Calamity Club. Bonnie Garmus, we love, the author of Lessons in Chemistry, says it's smart, funny, and driven by unforgettable characters whose opinions and actions leap off the page. This is a must read. Shelley Reed, the author of Go as a River, says Stockett's masterfully drawn characters are simply unforgettable, reminding us to never underestimate the bottomless resilience of smart, spirited women in revolt against circumstance and injustice. And Publishers Weekly said Stockett's vibrant follow up to her best selling 2009 novel, The Help, traces the intersecting lives of an exasperated older sister, a precocious orphan, and an enterprising woman in 1933 Mississippi. By turns hilarious, and it is, and heartbreaking, also that. This offers a memorable view into the impossible choices faced by women in the Great Depression. And with that, welcome, Kathryn. We're so glad to have you here.
I am so happy to be here, Carol.
So let's start with you telling us about the Calamity Club.
Yeah, I wrote the Calamity Club with the same intentions that I wrote The Help, and that is what happens when you put together a group of scrappy, strong-willed women, all with, a rich sense of humor and all at the very end of their rope in a time as tricky as the Great Depression. Add to that, it's Mississippi, which, is always challenging. There's no husbands, no fathers,
Mhm.
no brothers coming to save these women. And from this is born a terrible, awful, but very profitable idea to make money.
And I just love it. I love the way they conspire together to come up with the idea. They keep building on each other. So, how did you come up with the idea of what they were going to do and what was going to happen? Were you just reading around, or like were there a number of ideas you threw out through the years?
No, I had this idea that I wanted these women to come together and start a business that is pretty risque. Um, but for me, it's all about voice. And the first voice that came to me was Meg, an 11-year-old girl who is an orphan. She's been in the orphanage for 2 years and she's watching, her friends one by one get adopted, but she finds herself unadoptable, partly because of her own sass. And, she's a smart kid, but she's kind of stuck there. She's not like appropriate for adoption because she's already 11.
Mhm.
She's not going to be able to work in the fields because she's tiny. She's a little bitty girl. And she really just kind of stews and sits in this little room and we get to hear um for me, what I saw is like her wisdom
Mhm.
and her funnies. Children, they see right through the baloney
Yeah.
and they speak their mind. And what really drew me to Meg's voice was the fact that she called it like she sees it, kind of like me.
Mhm.
Um, and she's a witty little girl. And I love to write about voices that get right down to the truth.
She does. She is funny. She is honest about what her life is. And she's also so plucky. I mean, that's a word I would use to describe her is she's just going to come up with any idea to get herself out of the situation, including my favorite. I'm not really giving anything away, is people come in to try to adopt the children. And she sends out notes that there are many more babies there than they're going to be there because everybody wants a baby. And she's charged with putting these notes together and she's putting together there are many babies, so everybody should show up. And I just thought that was so perfect for a kid to be figuring out that's what they're coming for. And I'm not that, but
Yeah, yeah. She had to use some ingenuity and um, but she kind of, before she does get adopted, not to give it away, she is also at her end of her rope. And I gotta say that I do this, and I've done this in both books that I've written, and I'll do it in the next one I write. I like to ask myself, what is the absolute worst thing that can happen to a character?
Mhm,
I kind of write it for the big arc, in The Help, it was Hilly Holbrook and the chocolate pie.
mhm,
And in the Calamity Club, it's also on a daily basis. There's a character named Bertie whose sister is, just I, she's a socialite and she's a bit petty, and so I constantly, have Bertie testing her sister, just
mhm.
pushing, 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 and I totally enjoyed that because that's what I like to do. Um, but I find that when I ask these characters, what is the absolute worst thing that can happen to you in life, they come back with answers that are so often funny.
Mhm.
And so I just let them take over on the page. And I sometimes it's just me enjoying the ride.
During like what would they do, and there's this woman who's brutal who is running the orphanage. I mean, she is just horrible, and she's honored. That's the thing that's there's no way of like really understanding how somebody who could be that cruel is also the person that's being honored by the state, and oh, you've done so well. And then you've got the women who are following her, and they're just her acolytes, and they're just going anything she says. She is like the bee's knees. She's the perfect person. And I loved that character as well because she's so evil that you can't like her at all. There's what's redeeming.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to give her a few more layers than just
Mhm,
despicable. The circumstances upon which she is head of the orphanage, and what's made her into such a bitter woman is hopefully something
mhm,
that the reader will somewhat identify with. We won't have empathy for her, but we will understand what shaped this character. Her name is Garnett, and and we find out a few things about her and her
mhm.
husband that turned her into the hypocrite that she is.
Okay, so you see this, it's like we're peeling an onion when we're reading the story because they're multi layers. Do you go in knowing the layers of the characters, or do they come as you start writing and start giving them more layers?
No, I mean, I really mean it when I say these characters so often write themselves. I don't know where it comes from. And sometimes I don't even remember. I guess I go into some kind of strange trance. I won't even remember like a few days later what I wrote earlier that week, because I just sort of check out and let the characters do the talking. I know I sound like a truly a crazy person, but it seems to happen a lot. And I I have to go back and reread what was written. I want to say I wrote it, but the thing is, like, sometimes I feel like it's not even me that's writing it. It's these characters telling me their stories. So
Mhm.
no, I'm not one of those writers that lays out, a big plan and a plot map. I'd probably write a lot faster if I was that organized, but I'm not. I just have to wait for these characters to tell me their story.
And they're each so different, but they're each each in her own way is so strong. Whether she's strong in the right ways like Garnett, like the wrong ways like Garnett, but each of these women are coming together. And it's also interesting to see when you put a group of women in a room, what they can do when they've got these odds that they're not sure how they're ever going to overcome. And what are we going to do?
Yeah, I like to challenge my characters, you know. As I said, I like to put them in the worst possible position and ask them what is the most terrible thing that could happen to you. And you know, for a character like Mrs. Tart, who was, you know, the older woman who lives a very genteel Southern lifestyle. Her husband's passed away. What happens to her in the story, I think I hope helps develop and grow her character. Like we see that she really is a woman full of kindness, Mrs. Tart.
Hmm.
Whereas other characters like Frances, who is Bertie's sister, they don't fare quite so well. You know, you throw balls at her and she's going to get hit. She's just an easy target. But you know, as long as I'm entertaining myself, if I'm making myself laugh, I'm not trying to say that I act like I'm enamored of my work or anything. It's just that I really do laugh so much and I cackle
Right.
and I write often in voice, so I'm speaking the lines. So if you ever walked into my office or like even walked by the window and saw me, you would just think that's a crazy person in there.
Here she is. She's talking as Birdie. Here she is. Now she's turning to
Oh, I
herself. She's
know.
going back and forth, you know.
I sound like a lunatic.
But I love because you really put the characters into who they would be on every level. Frances shopping, Frances over shopping, Frances hearing they have no money and still shopping and still coming home. And my favorite is when she sees people wearing her dresses and she goes, "That's my good green dress. That's my good this.
But
What
don't
is
we
going
all
on
kind
with
of say that?
you?"
Like when our daughters or when our children wear our clothes, you're like, not my shoes, you know.
That's the
Um,
good green dress, as opposed to which was the other one.
I know. And they didn't, you know, it was the depression. So you
Yes.
couldn't just go right back out. But, you know, and there are also some very serious sides to this story. It it took me a really long time to write the Calamity Club because I, you know, when I first sat down to write my second book, I told myself that I was going to write a book very different than The Help. I didn't want to write a book that drew the same kinds of criticism
Mhm.
um, that The Help did. And what I ended up writing, you know, over the course of 7, 8, 9 years, was a really cautious, kind of bland tale.
Mhm.
And uh, then and I knew that it lacked heart. Like I knew, I could feel that it was missing something important. And then one day in my research, I stumbled upon this law that was passed in Mississippi in 1928, and it legalized the sterilization of any person that was deemed, you know, with idiocy or imbecility or epilepsy or had mental handicaps or autism, what we know now as autism. And it just, you know, it legalized the sterilization of these people. They could be locked up and sterilized without their consent. And it kind of like it shook me.
Yeah.
And I started doing research and I realized that Mississippi was actually way behind the times. In the 1920s and 30s, the eugenics laws, that's what these laws were called, were really starting to heat up. And Mississippi was like in the last third of the states to pass such a law. But then what really rocked me was when I was looking at so many of these cases of people that were sterilized, I noticed how many of them were women.
Hmm.
There was an overwhelming majority that were women, not men, and that the interpretation of this law was expanded to include this type of woman that was perceived as promiscuous.
Hmm.
And that caught my attention, because so many of these women, were just women that had had children out of wedlock. Um, they or perhaps, just because they didn't have enough money, they didn't dress right, they didn't act right. After World War I, there was something called the American Plan, which legalized law enforcement to stop any woman on the street just for looking promiscuous.
Wow.
And they could detain her there were cases where women were detained up to 6 months just because of the way they looked. And they would be tested for STDs. And, some of those tests were not that great.
Right.
And if there was any question that they might carry something, they could be sterilized under the sterilization laws without their consent.
Hmm.
And it just killed me. It resonated with me thinking about women's rights today
Hmm.
and how far we've come and what we stand to lose.
Yeah.
And so there are some very serious topics in this book as well.
You also mentioned in your forward that, or your author's note, that this concept was explored by the Nazis and Hitler. They wanted to hear more about what was going on in Mississippi. Like, what are you doing?
Oh, I mean, Mississippi was very slow to adopt a eugenics plan, but California, they were way ahead of the game
Right.
in that uh, they, sorry, I'm losing my words here. They ended up enforcing the sterilization laws so much that in the 1940s, late 1930s, early 1940s, the head of the Eugenics Society was contacted by Adolf Hitler, who saw what an incredible job California was doing, and he asked to fly Harry Laughlin out to Germany to teach them how to enforce this. And Harry Laughlin didn't end up going, but what he did do was send a written plan showing how one woman who was deemed feeble-minded, and feeble-minded went hand in hand with this interpretation of a loose, promiscuous woman, how it could destroy a society.
No.
That blew my mind. I have a
Yeah.
copy of the piece of paper.
Yeah. I mean, I read that and my head went, wow. I mean, and you know what's interesting? It's going on not that long ago. Like, we're really
Not that
not
long
talking
ago. I
not
mean,
that
for
long
some
ago.
of us, this was, our grandmother's time. For
Yeah.
others, our great grandmothers, but like not that long ago in perspective.
Mm-mm. No. And as you're sitting there, you're writing, though, you're sitting there thinking, I still have to make this into a story that's going to keep people going and keep people turning the pages. So when you have people coming up with this ingenious idea that they're going to run this business out of their house, well, it's not even their house. They're going to run out of this other woman's house. And what they're going to end up doing, it the characters are so much fun because you create this vibrant group of women, all of whom are, let's say, ladies of the night, and really where you you take each of them that we get to know their backstories and we get to know what got them to here as well. Did you know, like, did you just put on a piece of paper, these are the assets of so and so, this is so and so, or were they doing just that thing of speaking to you?
They were just doing their thing, really. But what I really wanted to do was avoid the stereotypes of like the hooker with the heart of gold. And what I really refuse to do is to write a victim, uh,
Hmm.
unless I'm going to completely tear her up and make fun of her the entire book. I don't want to write about any victims. Anybody that sees themselves as a victim is completely off my list of characters. I had so much fun writing the character Flossie. I mean, just that Fargo accent of her that I know is exaggerated, but it gave me so much joy hearing her accents mixing with the Southern accents. And sometimes it's fun to write, like to kind of dance around the risque, provocative terms of the time. And the things that they called, these ladies called the handful of curse words that we use now really weren't that popular back then. So there were some very colorful language
Totally.
being used.
Well, even the opener, where, and I'm sure it was plucked later on, where the one woman is going in to buy the Merry Widows in the drugstore, and you're setting up like, what is this, and what is going on, and what is the Merry? I think I have it right. The Merry Widow, is that what it's called? Yeah.
Three Merry Widows was the brand of condom that was sort of higher end. There was Trojan and there was Three Merry Widows, and they came in this sort of silver disc, and you got three of them. But you got to remember, like the Comstock laws were still in
Mhm.
existence, so you couldn't mail order your condoms. It was a federal offense. Um, and for a long time, you had to have a doctor's prescription. And then when they finally said that you don't have to have a prescription anymore, you had to prove in many states that you were only using the prophylactic to prevent disease,
Yeah.
not to prevent pregnancy. I
Right.
mean, really, like, this is it's just ridiculous when you think about really like all the luxuries that we have today, like birth control.
Exactly, exactly. And I also like while she's doing the math about how much these are going to cost. And there's a lot of math in this book because they're constantly, well, first of all, everything is like 3 cents, or it's like, like they're going to have they're going to go buy an outfit, it's $1.75. And I
Yeah.
love that because you're really thinking about like when we think about money today as opposed to there. It was always the stopper for me when they're doing the math. And Bertie's really great at doing math in her head. Like she could sit there and go, well, we're going to do this, and this is how much it's going to cost. And when she's saying they're buying the Merry Widows, and then I just love that they said, well, this is for a married woman, right? And she plucks her sister's name down there. And I was just like, oh, this book is going to be fun because you can just see just from that little opening scene of what's going to happen. And you just like, oh, there's your cold open, everybody. There you go.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm glad that it drew you in. When you start chapter one, and I really did this on purpose. It was really one of the first things I wrote when I wrote the story. I put a list of laws, a list of rules on the wall of the orphanage.
Hmm.
So once you get past that prologue and you get into Meg, um, I I made this decision pretty early on just to go ahead and write out a list of just absurd, hypocritical rules and plop them on the wall on page one with the hopes that like the reader would know right up front what they're getting into.
Right. And the laws were this, but every child. But we won't take this,
I
and
know
this.
we won't accept, children of color, no children with leprosy,
Yeah.
no twins, no hair lips, and then it's like God bless all children, we love all children or something. It's just one of those ridiculous absurdities that we all see in the South. So often we see it all over the United States, and we just walk right on by. And I put this line in the book many, many times, what we don't see. Gosh, what we walked right by and what we don't see.
Hmm. And how many of those women walked in there, saw that every single day? And this
Yeah.
girl Meg is sitting there like, oh, it's everybody except. Okay, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
See if you see any of them around here. And the place is falling apart. I mean, there's mold on the walls, there's water dripping in the ceilings. And the crazy thing is they're not worrying about the older girls because they're sending them out when they turn 12 to the canning factory because
That's
they're going to
right.
make money off of these girls like at that point, or they're going to be able to like, take care of themselves or whatever. And I was like, 12? Like 12?
I know. Isn't it heartbreaking to think that 12 was there was this exclusion in the child labor laws that um, happened in the 1920s that where they could no longer work like little kids,
Mhm.
but there was this loophole that children could still work in vegetable factories because it was seasonal, and I think they were afraid they wouldn't have enough labor if you couldn't hire a child. So that was the type of cannery it was.
It's like, we'll bring them in to do this. It's a very short amount of time, but they can be here.
Yeah.
And and they're getting ready to farm them out. And she doesn't want, Meg to leave because Meg is 11 and a couple of months till she'll be going to the canning factory.
That's
And
right.
it was, I don't know, it was just really crazy. What you're also seeing there thinking too, though, is these girls are all fighting among themselves. Like, I mean, they're also young girls and, things like that as well. And sticking out their tongues at each other and going, oh, you have to sit in the bad room and all this kind of stuff. So there's this underlying, you've got each age of what's happening with people. The older woman and how everything has to be perfect and fine in her home, no matter what is going on around her, she's got to believe it's perfect and fine. And you have that with two different women in two different towns, and that's the way they're supposed to living their lives is perfect. Everything's perfect.
Everything's perfect. That's right.
Yeah.
Um,
And I just
yeah.
love her son had the homosexuality. The homosexuality, two different words. I love that. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's
Yeah,
like,
the disease. It was seen as a disease for a long time.
right.
It's
It was, just the way, okay, we're sitting here and like I'm laughing thinking back, but you think about those times and the way the world was looked at, the way it was black and white. It was this and that. It was you were good or you were bad. It was don't get caught because all those boys were coming down. Let's face it, they were all coming down the Calamity Club, hanging out, blah, blah, blah. But that wasn't bad. That was like part of growing up as a young man. And I
that's
just
right.
love the way there were all these different ways of looking at things. You could look the other way if this is what you believed. And
You
money was
know,
all about it,
I thought that like the sexuality, the rite of passage was so interesting. There's not a lot of it in the book, but just this idea that it was sort of an obligation of a father to make sure that his son got laid before marriage so that he would know what he was doing on his wedding night. And at the same time, if a woman had sex before she was married, she was seen as a pariah. I
Mhm.
mean, God forbid she got pregnant. It just there were just so many examples like that that um I tried not to really, put too much emphasis on it. I just hope that the reader will see that kind of hypocrisy and just be like, wow, we've come a long way.
We've come a long way. And you think about it, the boys are coming back to college, and that's the whole setup is they're coming back, and now they couldn't have done this in July. This had to be happening like, end of August, beginning of September when they're all coming back to school. And then you've got Birdie as this woman who you know, nobody's seeing her going anywhere in life. She can't have children. It happens really up front in the book. We learn that. And as a result, well, you're just going to be like, over here. And meanwhile, she's cultivating a really smart life for herself. She is a smart person. She's saving a lot of things. And she's not like, oh, is that the person that's going to be the savior? Oh, didn't see that coming.
Well, Birdie is to me the essential, what I call the underestimated woman.
Hmm.
She is the kind of woman that you just, if you're not married by the time you're 21 in the South, and oh my gosh, is she actually working a job? And she doesn't really want to get married? Like, what is going on here? But the underestimated woman she's also kind of, the underdog,
Yeah.
the one that you just never suspect. If you see them on the street, like you don't think there's a whole lot going on when inside they're actually broiling to change their world. And I think a lot about my own mom growing up, a divorcee. She stepped out of the junior league. She was really one of the first in her circle to step out. Because she'd gotten a divorce, but also because she looked around the room one day and realized there was no one of color.
Hmm.
There were no Jewish people allowed in the junior league in the 1960s and the early 1970s. And she was just like, you know what, this is just not for me. And
Hmm.
she went home and, she didn't have any usable skills. She, had graduated high school and dropped out of college. And then one day she sat down and taught herself how to code, write computer code, and wrote this incredible program for the state of Mississippi to track child, hood immunizations. And like Mississippi didn't have anything of the sort
Wow.
in operation at the time. So it was a big deal. So I'm really proud of my mom. No one would have thought that she was capable of doing that.
And that's where a lot of your characters come from, is nobody thought they could actually do this. They never thought. And your
That's
book's
right.
dedicated to your mom. Your book's dedicated to your mom. Notice that as well. And it's like you can
Yeah.
tell you have a lot of pride in her. And now I'm hearing why, besides everything else, besides she's your mom.
Yeah.
There's the last line of the book I really loved is, I don't look back, Mick is talking. I don't look back on any of it. I just look straight ahead. And I love that line because there's so many times in life we really don't want to look back on any of it. Let's just look forward and see where we're going to take ourselves. And this plucky girl definitely felt that way about herself, is I'm going forward. Mm,
Yeah. I mean, especially when you're 11 years old and you've got your whole life ahead of you.
yeah.
Um, but I think, Meg would has a lot of things to think about too that have already happened to her in
Mm,
her life, and she's still very, very young.
yeah. They've already shaped her in so many different ways. Who was the most challenging character to write?
Um, Garnett, who is,
Yeah.
our evil witch, she was tricky to write because I was really trying not to write a completely flat character. I wanted to give her some nuance.
Mhm,
Even if you didn't sympathize with her, I wanted the reader to understand that she at least had reasons for her bitterness.
mhm,
Um, and I had a little trouble writing Rory, who
mhm,
is um, Francis's husband.
mhm.
Um, but Flossie was so much fun to write, I gotta say.
Yeah.
And I had there was a lot of joy and sadness in me as I read a character named Tom.
Hmm.
When Meg gets adopted, she gets adopted by just this very kind-hearted, intelligent man. He's just immature and
Hmm.
he
He's not the success his family wants him to be either.
he's not
Everything's about
exactly.
big
Thank you.
success.
Yeah, he is not following the rules that his family has set out for him. And he's very studious and he loves writing and he loves books. And I don't know, I had a lot of affection for
Yeah.
Tom.
Yeah, and his wife too, whose wife and Francis can sometimes be on the same level. They
Yeah,
would shop together. They would shop together. They'd find each
that's
other.
right.
And if there was one dress left, they'd be fighting over it for sure. Absolutely for sure. I like all the chapters were written either from Meg, who's also named Margot's point of view, or it was from Bertie. And there was one chapter that was Charlie. There was one, unless I'm missing something, which I don't know if I am. And we get to know her, this woman, in this one part, and then she becomes part of the other story. Am I wrong, or did I miss something? Or
Well, I don't think it was actually a voice, an I voice, first person in Charlie, but
okay.
we get to see really her inner self. I think the day that she stands at the front door of the orphanage and reveals herself. And we get a lot of inner thoughts. I think the arguments between Bertie and Charlie really showed us who they both are.
Hmm.
And as any writer will say this, like there's really no point in even writing a book if your characters don't change.
Hmm.
And so it was a challenge to make sure that Charlie and Bertie both changed by the end of the story, but still retained their values.
Hmm. I would say they both became more confident, but they still had the values that they had before, but they felt stronger about themselves.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do too. But they
Yeah.
had a pretty good idea where they wanted to go, but it was a very circuitous route that they took to get there.
Yeah. We were around. It's a lot of fun. That's one thing I will say is, everybody, this book is a lot of fun. Was the title always The Calamity Club?
No, it was the Tart Club. It
Okay.
was Wild Blue. We tried a couple of different things, and the Calamity Club. I landed on that because I just love this word calamity. I feel like it's kind of underused.
Yeah.
It was one of Mark Twain's favorite words, and I thought it fit the time, the 20s and 30s.
It also summed up where they were in. They had a real calamity on their hands of what they were going to do on a lot of different levels. I also love that there were two cars. There was a Studebaker and there was the Pierce Arrow. And the two cars that were in it said so much as you pictured those cars driving down the road, like both of them, and what they would mean. And they were like characters in some way because one was taking somebody away and the other one was just this woman's personality came out as she pulled up in this car and driving along around with Flossie and the other women. I mean, it had to be a riot, you know?
That's great. That's great. I picked up the Pierce Arrow image from a Eudora Welty story um, that really touched me. You know, she's from Mississippi. She was a writer, and she grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, and was actually a friend of my grandfather's. So she wrote about that Pierce Arrow, and I just never lost that image in my head.
The car going down the road. This is what's happening. Um, okay, was this always the cover or do you play around with that too? I'm trying to get the cover right here.
We played around with that. It was the UK actually began with that cover, and then the US, we adopted it, and I think it suits the story.
You know, I said I always wear something solid, but this one I felt like I had to wear something that kind of like worked with the cover. I was getting dressed before and I was in my closet. I was like, wait a second, that dress, pull that one out, you know. The audio is narrated by Jenna Lamia and January Lavoie. What did you love about their voices to tell the story? Because I listened to part on audio and they're very good.
Oh, good, good. You've actually heard more than I have. You know, I love that they can both pull off um, perfect Southern accents.
Hmm.
There's nothing worse to me than listening to a non-Southerner, you know, trying to put forth, what their version of a Southern accent is. I thought they do a great job in the interviews. They really nailed it. And Jenna Lomia actually narrates part of The Help as well.
Oh, okay. I was trying to remember who had done which. Okay. So now there are a lot of us that always think book and then think film adaptation. Has there any been a film conversation about this, even if you can't tell us that they're what it is or not yet?
Oh, no secrets here, but nothing's been done yet. We've had lots of inquiries. Um, I just haven't had time really to think about it.
Hmm.
And I'm about to go on the road for tour
Hmm.
across the US starting May 4th.
May 4th,
And
you're in
and
Brooklyn. May 5th, you're in New Jersey. Yes,
that's right. Yeah,
exactly.
and then I come down south and do south, and I do a little more east, and then I go to Europe and do those countries. So I hope that, I have time this summer to sit down and really think about how this story would translate on the screen.
Hmm. Because so
I
much
don't
has
have any
changed.
interest in writing the screenplay,
Yeah.
but I would love for another Southerner to get their hands on it.
You know, so much has changed since this book came out. So many options of being able to put it on Netflix, to be able to put it as a series, to be able to do that. Before it was a movie in 2009, that's all we were thinking about. Is we were thinking
That's
about a
right.
movie going up on the big screen. It was going to run for a certain amount of time and then probably go to HBO. And that was about it.
Yeah,
Maybe Showtime, you know, but those were the only options. And when you
that's
think
right.
about as much changed in these last years, it's pretty amazing.
Lots changed. Because it is a rather long book. I would love to see it as a series
Hmm.
because uh, every writer, every novelist, they want to see the story told in full.
Hmm.
But if it ends up being a feature film, I think I'm okay with that too because um, there's so much that can be said in a character's face that you don't have to spend, 40 pages on in the book.
Right.
So I think it'd go either way.
Did you always know it was going to be a long book? Like, did anybody, when you're working with Julie Grau, it was amazing. Did she ever say to you, I think this should be shorter? Did anybody tell you?
No, she didn't. She never stopped me. And I kept saying, Julie, I think this book's getting a little long, a little long. She said, no, it's not. No, it's not. Just keep going. But when I first started writing this, I swore to myself I was going to write a short book. I think The Help is what, 450 pages, maybe 500. And this one is
624.
100 pages longer. So yeah.
Well, let's say I started reading this Friday night and I had to pick up the audio on Monday, but I only had like 100 pages left. I was really flying through it because it's that good. It's that compelling a story. And when I sat down, I didn't feel like I had to get to know the characters again because you drew them so well. So when I sat down and I saw Flossie or I saw whatever came out of their mouths, it didn't sound inauthentic. Like you just were playing with them. And I felt like I saw them in the room. So
That's all I want to hear.
and
It's
it's
the
for
best
like,
thing a writer can hear.
623 to 624 pages, and I sat there and I was like, I'm going to interview her when? Tuesday? Okay, I can do that. I'll take that challenge. In fact, I wrote in our newsletter, Book Reporter newsletter last week, this is what I'll be doing this weekend.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was an absolute pleasure. And that's really, that's a fun part of reading a book where you walk away and you feel like I felt like that with The Help. I feel like I could still talk about parts of that book now, though it came out in 2009. I've read a lot of books in between and still sit there and say, oh, remember that character?
Oh,
Remember
wow. Thank
easily.
you. That's so good to hear.
Well, look, I don't want to wait 17 more years. That's all I'm just saying. So
I
I'm
don't think
hoping
it'll
you're
be that
scribbling
long.
something on a piece of paper someplace that there's another one. And, meanwhile, everybody's got something in store, but like not 17 years. I can't even do the math that high. I'm not the math whiz. Okay. Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Carol. This has been a real pleasure.
And we're looking forward to much, much, much success for you. I can't wait till our readers start reading this and start talking about it. Guys, this is your summer read. Here you go, right here. Thanks. See you next time, everybody.